The apartment in downtown Nairobi trembled with rage. David's voice cut through the evening air like a knife, sharp and merciless. His words weren't just loud, they were weapons. "You think because you work as a nurse now, you can question me," he shouted, his face twisted with anger. The smell of cheap whiskey hung heavy in the small living room. Grace stood near the kitchen doorway, her hands shaking. Their daughter, only 3 years old, had finally fallen asleep after an hour of crying. Grace's nursing shift had ended late, and she'd come home exhausted, only to find David drunk again. "I only asked where you were," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "The baby was crying, and I couldn't reach you." David's eyes flashed with fury. In that moment, he wasn't the man she'd married 5 years ago. That man had been kind, ambitious, full of dreams. This man was a stranger, hollowed out by unemployment and self-pity. "Don't use that tone with me," he snarled, stepping closer. "I'm still the man of this house." Grace took a step back, her heart pounding. She'd seen this pattern before. The drinking, the accusations, the violence that always followed. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the air crackled with something darker. "David, please," she pleaded. "Let's just talk in the morning when you're—" The slap came without warning. The sound echoed through the small apartment like a thunderclap. Grace's head snapped to the side, pain exploding across her cheek. She tasted blood. "You think you're better than me?" David's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You with your nursing job and your education?" Tears streamed down Grace's face. "I never said that. I love you. I just want—" Another blow, harder this time. She stumbled backward, her vision blurring. The edge of the coffee table caught her hip, and she cried out. From the bedroom, their daughter began to wail. But David didn't stop. Years of frustration, of feeling like a failure, of watching his wife succeed while he floundered, it all came pouring out in violence. His fists became the voice of his shame. Grace tried to shield herself, tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The small apartment that had once been their haven had become a cage. "Stop," she screamed. "Please, David, stop." But he was beyond hearing, beyond reason. His hands found her throat. The neighbors heard the screaming. Mrs. Wanjiku from next door pressed her ear against the wall, debating whether to call the police. In Kenya, these things were considered family matters. But the sounds tonight were different. More desperate, more dangerous. Grace's world began to fade. Black spots danced before her eyes. She clawed at David's hands, but her strength was leaving her. In that moment, staring into the eyes of the man she'd once loved, she made a decision. If she survived this, she would never come back. Finally, David released her. Grace collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, her body a symphony of pain. She could hear her daughter crying, could hear David's heavy breathing above her. "Look what you made me do," he muttered, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Grace didn't respond. She couldn't. Every breath was agony. Blood dripped from her nose onto the cold tile floor. David stumbled backward, suddenly seeming to realize what he'd done. Grace. Grace, get up. But she couldn't. The room was spinning. Darkness pulled at the edges of her consciousness. The last thing she heard before everything went black was Mrs. Wanjiku pounding on the door, shouting for someone to call an ambulance. If this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe to Stories by Tino. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Your support keeps us going. Remember, no one deserves to live in fear. The harsh fluorescent lights of Kenyatta National Hospital burned David's eyes as police officers escorted him through the emergency entrance. His hands were cuffed behind his back, cutting into his wrists. But that pain was nothing compared to the ice forming in his chest. "She's in surgery," one officer said coldly. "Internal bleeding, broken ribs, collapsed lung. You almost killed your own wife." David's legs nearly gave out. The officer's grip on his arm tightened, keeping him upright. "I didn't mean," David started, but the officer cut him off. "They all say that. Every single one of you." They placed David in a small holding room near the emergency department. Through the narrow window, he could see doctors and nurses rushing back and forth. Somewhere in this building, Grace was fighting for her life. He slumped against the wall, his mind replaying the night's events. The anger had felt so justified in the moment. But now, in the cold clarity of consequences, he saw himself for what he'd become, a monster. Hours crawled by. No one came to update him. Why would they? He was the reason she was here. Finally, as dawn broke over Nairobi, a doctor appeared. She was middle-aged, her face lined with exhaustion and barely contained anger. "Are you the husband?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. David nodded, unable to speak. "Your wife is alive," the doctor said. "Barely. We've stabilized her for now, but the next 48 hours are critical. She has 3 broken ribs, 1 punctured her lung, severe bruising to her throat, concussion, internal bleeding that required immediate surgery." Each word hit David like a physical blow. "Can I see her?" he whispered. The doctor's eyes flashed. "Absolutely not. You've done enough. The police will be charging you, and there's a protection order being filed. You won't be allowed anywhere near her." "But I need to apologize." "Apologies don't heal broken bones," the doctor snapped. "Your daughter is being cared for by a neighbor. Child services will be involved. Your wife will decide if she ever wants to see you again, but that won't be today." She turned to leave, then paused. "You know what the worst part is? This is my 3rd case like this just this week. You men think your fists solve problems. They don't. They only create them." After she left, David broke down. The tears came in waves, mixing with the bitter taste of regret. The police formally arrested him later that morning. As they led him to the station, he caught a glimpse of Mrs. Wanjiku holding his daughter in the hospital corridor. His little girl was crying, calling for her mother. She didn't even look at him. At the police station, David was processed and placed in a cell. The concrete walls seemed to close in on him. Other inmates stared, and one older man shook his head. "Woman beater," someone muttered. "Lowest form of man." David sat on the cold bench, his head in his hands. What had he become? When did the love he once felt turn into this violence? He remembered their wedding day. Grace had looked so beautiful, so full of hope. She'd believed in him when no one else did. When he lost his job as an accountant 2 years ago, she'd worked double shifts to support them. She never complained, never made him feel less than a man. And this was how he repaid her. Evening came. A duty lawyer appeared, a young woman with kind eyes. "Mr. Kamau, I'm here to represent you. But I need you to understand something. The evidence is overwhelming. Witnesses heard everything. Your wife's injuries speak for themselves. You're looking at serious prison time." "I deserve it," David said quietly. The lawyer seemed surprised. "You're admitting to the assault?" "Yes. All of it." He looked up, his eyes red. "How is she? Please, just tell me if she's going to live." The lawyer consulted her phone. "She's out of surgery. Still critical but stable. That's all I know." David nodded, fresh tears falling. "Thank you." That night, lying on the hard prison bench, David made a promise to himself. If Grace lived, he would spend the rest of his life trying to become the man she'd once believed he could be. Not for forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve that. But because she deserved better than what he'd given her. The darkness of the cell matched the darkness in his soul. But somewhere in that darkness, a tiny spark of awareness flickered. The awareness that change, though late, was still possible. Grace floated in darkness. Voices drifted to her from far away, muffled and distorted. She tried to open her eyes, but they felt so heavy. "Her vitals are improving," a voice said. She's a fighter. Am I? Grace thought. Or am I just too stubborn to die? Memories flickered through her consciousness like a broken film reel. Her daughter's laugh. The first time David hit her, a shove, really, followed by immediate apologies and tears. She'd believed it would never happen again. But it had. Again and again, each time worse than the last. The darkness pulled at her, inviting her to let go. It would be so easy. No more pain, no more fear. But then she heard it, a child's cry. Her daughter. Grace's eyes flew open. White ceiling tiles. The rhythmic beep of monitors. The sharp smell of antiseptic. She tried to move, and pain exploded through her body. She's awake. A nurse rushed to her side. Grace, can you hear me? Blink if you understand. Grace blinked. Good. You're in the hospital. You've been in surgery. Don't try to move yet. You have a chest tube and several IVs. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign. Over the next hours, Grace learned the extent of her injuries. The doctor explained everything gently but honestly. She would recover, but it would take time. Where's my daughter? Grace managed to whisper, though speaking hurt. She's with your neighbor, Mrs. Wanjiku. She's safe and being well cared for. Child services are involved, but only to ensure her well-being during your recovery. And David. The doctor's expression hardened. He's been arrested. He can't come near you. There's a protection order. Grace closed her eyes. Part of her felt relief. Another part felt, what? Grief. For the man he used to be, or for the years she'd wasted hoping he'd change back. Her sister, Faith, arrived that afternoon. The moment she saw Grace, she burst into tears. Oh my God, Grace. What did he do to you? Grace couldn't answer. The tears came instead, silent and endless. Faith held her hand carefully, mindful of the fall. I should have known. I should have seen it. You kept making excuses, falling downstairs, bumping into doors. I should have pushed harder. It wasn't your fault, Grace whispered. I hid it well. Why? Faith's voice broke. Why didn't you leave? It was the question everyone would ask. The question Grace had asked herself 1,000 times. I kept thinking he'd change back, Grace said slowly. The David I married was kind. I thought if I loved him enough, supported him enough, that man would return. And I was ashamed. Ashamed that my marriage was failing. Ashamed that I, a nurse who saw abuse victims every day, couldn't save myself. Faith squeezed her hand. You're out now. That's what matters. But was she? Grace wondered. The physical injuries would heal, but what about the fear that had burrowed into her bones? What about the nightmares that already haunted the edges of her consciousness? The next day, a victim support counselor visited. Her name was Rose, and she had kind eyes that held understanding, not pity. I'm here to help you navigate what comes next, Rose explained. Legally, emotionally, practically. You don't have to face this alone. What happens to David? Grace asked. That's partly up to you. The state will prosecute him regardless, but your testimony will be crucial. He's facing charges of grievous bodily harm, domestic violence, and attempted murder. Attempted murder. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I don't want to destroy him, Grace said quietly. Rose leaned forward. Grace, he nearly destroyed you. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice and ensuring this never happens to you or anyone else. Later, when Grace was alone, she stared out the hospital window at the Nairobi skyline. The city moved on, indifferent to her pain. Cars honked, people walked, life continued. She thought about the other women like her, suffering in silence, making excuses, hoping for change that never came. How many were out there right now, enduring what she'd endured? Her phone, retrieved from her belongings, had dozens of missed calls. Friends, colleagues, family, all reaching out. She scrolled through the messages, each one offering support, love, prayers. Then she saw it. A message from David's mother. "I'm so sorry. I raised him better than this. Please, if you can find it in your heart, forgive him. He's suffering too." Grace stared at the message for a long time. Suffering too? She deleted it. That night, her daughter was finally allowed to visit, brought by Mrs. Wanjiku. The little girl ran to the bedside, her face lighting up. "Mama." "Careful, baby," Mrs. Wanjiku cautioned. "Mama has owies." Grace's heart broke and healed simultaneously. She carefully lifted her arm, and her daughter snuggled against her side. "I missed you so much," Grace whispered, breathing in her daughter's scent, baby shampoo and innocence. "Where's Daddy?" the child asked. Grace exchanged glances with Mrs. Wanjiku. This was the conversation she'd been dreading. "Daddy had to go away for a while," Grace said carefully. "But you're going to stay with Auntie Wanjiku and visit Mama every day until Mama gets better. Is that okay?" Her daughter nodded, then said something that made Grace's blood run cold. "Is Daddy gone because he hurt you?" "I heard the loud noises." Grace held her daughter tighter, despite the pain. "Yes, baby. But you're safe now. We both are." That night, after everyone left, Grace made a decision. She would not just survive this, she would use it. She would become a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for those still trapped in the darkness she'd escaped. David had tried to break her. Instead, he'd forged her into something stronger. The Kamatai maximum security prison was nothing like David imagined. The smell hit him first, sweat, fear, and despair mixed into something nauseating. The sounds came next, clanging metal, shouted conversations, the constant underlying threat of violence. David had been transferred here after his arraignment. The judge had denied bail, citing flight risk and the severity of Grace's injuries. Now, 3 weeks into his detention, reality had fully settled in. He was a criminal. "Kamau!" a guard barked. "Visitor." David's heart leaped. Grace. Had she come? He shuffled to the visiting area, the chains on his ankles making a rhythmic clink. But it wasn't Grace. It was his mother. Mama Agnes looked smaller somehow, her face lined with shame and sorrow. When she saw him, she began to cry. "My son, what have you done?" David sat heavily on the plastic chair, unable to meet her eyes. "I don't know, Mama. I lost myself. Your father would be so ashamed. I raised you to respect women, to honor your wife. How did you become this?" "I'm sorry," David whispered. "I'm so sorry." His mother leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Grace won't see me. She won't return my calls. You have to tell her you're sorry. You have to make this right." "How?" David's voice cracked. "How do I make right what I did? I nearly killed her, Mama. I saw her blood on my hands. I heard her begging me to stop, and I didn't stop." The truth of his words hung between them like a prison of its own. "She needs to forgive you," his mother insisted. "For her own healing." David shook his head. "No, Mama. She needs to heal, period. Whether she forgives me or not is her choice. I have no right to ask for anything from her." His mother looked shocked. In their culture, reconciliation was expected, forgiveness demanded. But David had seen something in that hospital corridor, in the eyes of the nurses and doctors. He'd seen what he truly was. After the visit, David returned to his cell. His cellmate, an older man named Joseph serving time for fraud, observed him quietly. "That your mother?" Joseph asked. David nodded. "She wants you to be forgiven." "How did you know?" Joseph laughed bitterly. "Because they all do. Mothers, they can't see their sons as monsters. Even when we are." David sat on his bunk. "I am a monster. Maybe. Or maybe you're a man who did monstrous things. There's a difference, but only if you change." How do I change when I'm locked in here? Joseph gestured around the cell. This is exactly where change happens, my friend. When you have nothing left but yourself, that's when you finally face who you really are. That night, lying on the hard mattress, David thought about Joseph's words. Who was he, really? Not the man Grace had married. That man had been a mask. Not the violent drunk who'd beaten his wife. That had been a demon wearing his face. So who remained when both masks were stripped away? Over the following weeks, David began to observe the other inmates. Some were hardened criminals, proud of their violence. Others were broken men, destroyed by their own choices. Then there was a small group who met each Wednesday in the prison chapel. David had noticed them. They carried themselves differently, with a quiet dignity. One Sunday, curiosity got the better of him. He attended the prison church service. The chaplain, a soft-spoken man named Pastor Michael, preached about redemption. Not the easy kind, not the Hollywood version where one prayer fixes everything. The hard kind, the kind that required facing your sins, accepting consequences, and doing the painful work of becoming new. After the service, Pastor Michael approached David. First time here. David nodded. What brings you to prison, if you don't mind me asking? I nearly killed my wife. The chaplain didn't flinch, didn't judge. Do you regret it? Every second of every day. Good. Regret means your conscience is alive. Some men in here have killed theirs completely. Pastor Michael sat beside him. Redemption is possible, even for you. But it starts with truth. Honest, painful truth about who you've been and who you want to become. David found himself returning to the chapel. Not because he suddenly became religious, but because it was the only place where people talked about change as if it were real. He joined a support group for violent offenders. Led by a former inmate who'd served 15 years for manslaughter, the group was brutally honest. I want to hear your story, the leader Marcus said during David's first session. No excuses, no justifications. Just truth. David told them everything. The unemployment, the drinking, the first time he shoved Grace. The escalation. The final night. He cried through most of it, and the other men let him. When he finished, Marcus nodded. Thank you for your honesty. Now let me tell you what I heard. A man who blamed everyone but himself. Your wife's success didn't make you violent. Your unemployment didn't make you violent. You made a choice again and again, to use your fists instead of your words. The words stung because they were true. But, Marcus continued, acknowledging that is step one. Most men never get there. They die blaming the world for their own failures. You're here, which means you still have a chance. David became committed to the group. He learned about anger management, about the cycle of violence, about how his own childhood trauma, watching his uncle beat his aunt, had normalized violence in his mind. Understanding didn't excuse his actions, but it helped him see the patterns he needed to break. 3 months into his incarceration, David received news that shook him. Grace had filed for divorce. The papers were delivered by his lawyer. She's also requesting full custody, a restraining order, and wants you to sign away your parental rights voluntarily. David stared at the papers. His daughter's face swam before his eyes. What should I do? He asked his lawyer. Fight it. You're the father, you have rights. But David thought about his daughter witnessing that final night. The sounds she must have heard. The fear she must have felt. No, he said quietly. I'll sign everything. Grace deserves to move on, and my daughter deserves better than a father like me. His lawyer looked surprised. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. When he told the support group about his decision, Marcus nodded approvingly. That's real change, my brother. Putting their needs above your pride. That night, David signed the divorce papers and the voluntary termination of his parental rights. Each signature felt like a knife to his heart, but it also felt right. He wrote a letter to Grace, though he knew she might never read it. Grace, I sign these papers not because I don't love our daughter, but because I do. She deserves a father who protects her, not one who traumatizes her. I deserve these consequences. I don't ask for forgiveness. I have no right. I only ask that you tell her, someday when she's old enough to understand, that her father's greatest act of love was letting her go. I'm sorry will never be enough. But I'm changing. Not for you, not to win you back, but because I finally see what I was. And I refuse to be that man anymore. May God give you the peace I stole from you. He gave the letter to his lawyer to deliver. The walls of his cell no longer felt quite as confining. He'd built bigger prisons in his own mind, and those were the ones he was finally learning to escape. 6 months had passed since that terrible night. Grace stood in her new apartment, smaller than the one she'd shared with David, but filled with light. Most importantly, it was hers. Safe. Free. She watched her daughter play with building blocks, her little face scrunched in concentration. The child had started therapy, and slowly, the nightmares were becoming less frequent. Grace's phone buzzed. It was her lawyer. He signed everything. No fight, no contest. The divorce is final, and he voluntarily terminated his parental rights. Grace sat down slowly. She'd expected a battle. David's pride had always been his downfall. She'd assumed he'd cling to his rights as a father. Did he say why? She asked. He wrote a letter. I can forward it if you'd like. Grace hesitated. Yes. Please. After hanging up, she made tea and waited for the email. When it arrived, her hands trembled as she opened the attachment. Reading David's words, something shifted in her chest. Not forgiveness. She wasn't ready for that. Might never be. But something softer than the hatred she'd been carrying. He was letting go. Really letting go. Her sister Faith had moved in with her temporarily, helping with childcare while Grace returned to work. The nursing staff at Nairobi Hospital had been incredibly supportive, but Grace noticed something new, an awareness. How many women came through those emergency doors with accidental injuries? How many wore long sleeves in summer? How many flinched when doors slammed? Grace began to see herself in them. One evening, she stayed late to talk with a young woman who'd come in with a fall down the stairs. The bruises told a different story. I'm a nurse here, Grace said gently. But I'm also someone who survived what you're going through. The woman's eyes widened. How did you know? Because I wore the same long sleeves. Made the same excuses. Grace rolled up her own sleeves, showing the faint scars that remained. This is what falling downstairs really looks like. And these, she touched her ribs gently, are from the night I actually fell. Or rather, was pushed. Tears streamed down the young woman's face. I don't know how to leave. I know. Neither did I. But I can help you. Let me help you. That conversation became the first of many. Grace started volunteering with a women's shelter on her days off. She trained in domestic violence counseling. She became the voice she'd needed to hear during her darkest days. The shelter director, a formidable woman named Helen, recognized Grace's potential immediately. You have a gift, Helen said after watching Grace counsel a group of survivors. You speak their language because you've walked their path. I want to do more, Grace admitted. I want to create a program specifically for women recovering from domestic violence. Medical care, counseling, legal aid, job training, everything in one place. Helen smiled. That's ambitious. I know. But it's needed. Over the next months, Grace threw herself into planning. She called the initiative New Dawn Women's Center. She reached out to other survivors, medical professionals, lawyers willing to work pro bono, and local businesses for funding. Her story, which had been published in a national newspaper with her permission, brought unexpected support. Donations poured in. Other survivors reached out, wanting to help. Grace's mother, who had been silent during her marriage to David, believing a wife should stay no matter what, finally apologized. I was wrong, she said, tears streaming down her face. I was so wrong to tell you to be patient, to pray more, to submit. I almost lost you because of my old-fashioned thinking. Grace hugged her mother. You taught me what you were taught. But we can learn better. We can do better. The first location for New Dawn opened in a small building in Kibera. It was modest, just 3 rooms and a courtyard, but it represented hope. On opening day, 20 women came. Some brought children. All brought stories of survival. Grace stood before them, her heart full. Welcome. You are safe here. You are believed here. And you are valued here. What happened to you was not your fault. And your story doesn't end with your pain, it begins with your courage to seek help. The women nodded, some crying, some simply exhaling as if they'd been holding their breath for years. Among them was a familiar face, Mrs. Wanjiku, her former neighbor. After the session, Mrs. Wanjiku pulled Grace aside. I never told you this, but my late husband, he was like David. Worse, maybe. I survived by staying silent. But watching you nearly die, then watching you rise, you gave me permission to finally talk about it. Grace hugged her tight. Thank you for calling the ambulance that night. You saved my life. And you're saving others now. That's how healing works. We pass it forward. That evening, as Grace returned home, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Her suffering had meaning now. It was transforming from a wound into wisdom. Her daughter ran to hug her legs. Mama, you're home. I am, baby. I'm finally home. Later, after her daughter was asleep, Grace sat on her small balcony, looking at the Nairobi lights. She thought about David, wondering if he was changing as his letter suggested. She hoped so, not for herself, but for any future woman who might cross his path. She thought about forgiveness. People kept asking if she'd forgiven him. The truth was complicated. She'd forgiven herself for staying too long. She'd forgiven herself for believing his promises. She'd forgiven herself for loving a man who hurt her. As for David, forgiveness felt less important than freedom. She was free now. Free from fear, free from him. Free to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was destroyed. Her phone rang. It was Helen. Grace, we just got a call. A woman is hiding in her bathroom. Her husband is drunk and breaking down the door. She saw your interview on TV and memorized our number. We need to go now. Grace grabbed her keys without hesitation. This was her calling now, running toward the danger she'd escaped, pulling other women out of the darkness. As she drove through the night, she thought about that terrified woman. Soon, she'd tell her the same truth that had saved Grace. You are stronger than you know. And you are not alone. Not anymore. The courtroom was cold despite the Nairobi heat outside. Grace sat in the witness stand, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Across the room, David sat with his lawyer, his eyes fixed on the table before him. He hadn't looked at her once. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Oching, approached gently. Mrs. Kamau, or should I say Ms. Njeri, since you've reclaimed your maiden name? Grace is fine, she replied, her voice steady. Grace, can you tell the court what happened on the night of March 15th? Grace had prepared for this moment. She'd practiced in front of her counselor, her sister, even her mirror. But nothing fully prepared her for the reality of speaking her truth in public. She began slowly, describing the evening. The prosecutor occasionally interrupted with clarifying questions. Grace answered each one honestly, her voice never wavering. And when he had his hands around your throat, what were you thinking? Grace's voice finally cracked. I thought I was going to die. I thought my daughter would grow up without a mother. And I remember thinking that I should have left the first time he hit me. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. And how long had the abuse been happening? Almost 2 years. It started small, pushing, grabbing my arm too hard, then escalated to slapping. That final night was the worst it had ever been. The defense attorney, a middle-aged man with a patronizing manner, stood for cross-examination. Ms. Injeri, you're a nurse, correct? Yes. An educated woman with your own income? Yes. Then why didn't you simply leave? Grace had expected this question. Everyone asked it. As if leaving were simple. As if fear and love and hope and children didn't complicate everything. Because I loved him, Grace said clearly. Because he wasn't always violent. Because he promised to change. Because I worried about my daughter growing up without a father. Because leaving is the most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship. Statistically, that's when most domestic violence murders occur. Should I continue? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. No further questions. When David's lawyer called character witnesses, Grace listened to his mother describe him as a good boy, his friends claim he'd just been stressed, his former employer praise his work ethic. None of it changed the facts. The medical reports. The police photographs. The neighbors' testimonies. During recess, Grace stepped outside for air. A young woman approached her hesitantly. Excuse me. You're Grace Injeri? Grace nodded. I saw your interview on Citizen TV. My boyfriend. He's been hurting me. Your story made me finally report it. I just wanted to say thank you. Grace hugged her. You're so brave. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? I'm at a shelter now. Good. Stay strong. It gets better, I promise. After the woman left, Grace felt renewed strength. This trial wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman watching, every woman considering whether to report, every woman wondering if justice was possible. The trial lasted 3 days. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. The defendant is found guilty on all counts: grievous bodily harm, domestic violence, and assault with intent to cause serious injury. Given the severity of the injuries inflicted and the defendant's initial lack of remorse, though recent rehabilitation efforts are noted, I sentence him to 8 years imprisonment. 8 years. David's mother wailed. His lawyer immediately filed notice of appeal. But Grace felt relief. Not joy, not satisfaction. Just relief that it was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. How do you feel about the sentence? Do you think 8 years is enough? Will you forgive him? Grace held up her hand. I'm satisfied that justice was served. I hope Mr. Kamau uses his time in prison to genuinely change, not just for me, but for any future partner. As for forgiveness, that's personal and ongoing. But what I want women watching this to know is that you don't need your abuser's remorse to heal. You don't need his apology to move forward. Your healing is yours alone. That night, Grace sat with her daughter, who was now old enough to ask difficult questions. Mama, will Daddy come home? Grace chose her words carefully. No, sweetheart. Daddy made some very bad choices and hurt Mama. So he has to stay away to learn to be better. Did I do something wrong? Grace's heart broke. Oh, baby, no. None of this was your fault. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes. But that has nothing to do with you. You are loved. You are precious. And you are safe. Her daughter seemed to accept this, returning to her coloring book. But Grace knew these conversations would continue, evolving as her daughter grew older and understood more. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Grace received an unexpected letter. It was from David, written from prison. She debated throwing it away unopened. But curiosity won. Dear Grace, I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness. I heard your testimony in court. Every word was like a knife, but I deserved every cut. You spoke the truth about who I was, a coward who used violence to feel powerful. I'm writing because I want you to know that I'm not appealing the sentence. My lawyer wants to, but I refused. 8 years is less than you deserved to give me. Less than what I deserve. I've been attending every rehabilitation program the prison offers. Anger management, substance abuse counseling, a support group for violent offenders. I'm also working with Pastor Michael, learning that accountability isn't just saying sorry, it's changing completely. I don't expect you to care about my progress. Why should you? I just wanted you to know that your survival forced me to face myself. And what I saw was monstrous. Thank you for being brave enough to testify. Thank you for not letting me get away with it. And thank you for protecting our daughter from me. That was love, real love, the kind I failed to show you. I hope you're healing. I hope you're happy. I hope you never think of me again. David. Grace read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. She didn't know if his change was real or temporary. That wasn't her burden to carry anymore. What mattered was her own journey forward. 1 year after the trial, Grace's new Dawn Women's Center had expanded to 3 locations across Nairobi. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. She'd helped over 200 women escape abusive situations, and many had become volunteers themselves, creating a beautiful cycle of healing. On a Tuesday afternoon, Grace received an unusual phone call. Ms. Njeri? My name is Agnes Kamau. I'm David's mother. Grace's first instinct was to hang up. She'd made it clear she wanted no contact with David's family. Please, just give me 5 minutes, Agnes pleaded. I'm not calling to defend my son. I'm calling to help your mission. Curiosity overrode caution. I'm listening. I've watched what you've built. I've seen the women you've helped. And I've realized something. I enabled my son. When he first told me he'd pushed you, I told him to apologize and be a better husband. I never asked if this was a pattern. I never questioned deeper. Agnes's voice cracked. I was part of the problem. Grace said nothing, letting the woman continue. I want to donate to your center. I want to speak to other mothers about recognizing the signs, about not excusing our son's violence. I want to do something right, even if it's too late for you. Grace was silent for a long moment. Mrs. Kamau, I appreciate this. But I need to be honest. Working with you would be difficult for me. I understand completely. You don't have to see me or speak to me. I can donate anonymously, work with other staff. Whatever helps your mission without hurting you. Something in Agnes's humility touched Grace. Let me think about it. After hanging up, Grace discussed it with Helen, the shelter director. It's your call, Helen said. But I'll say this. Some of our most effective advocates are mothers of abusers who've done the hard work of accountability. They reach audiences we can't. Grace thought about it for a week. Finally, she agreed to let Agnes volunteer, but with boundaries. They wouldn't work directly together, and Agnes would focus on community education, not victim support. The first workshop Agnes led was at a church in Eastlands. 30 mothers attended. My name is Agnes, she began, her voice shaking. My son is in prison for nearly killing his wife. And I'm here to tell you, I saw the signs and I did nothing. The room went silent. When he was a teenager, I watched him push his girlfriend during an argument. I told myself it was just youthful temper. When he was engaged, I heard him yell at his fiancée disrespectfully. I told her privately to be patient with him, that marriage would settle him down. Agnes wiped her eyes. I was wrong. Marriage doesn't fix violent men. It just gives them more access to victims. And by excusing my son's behavior, I helped create the monster who almost murdered that beautiful woman. Several mothers in the audience were crying. If your son disrespects women, correct it now. If your son handles anger with aggression, get him help now. If your son blames others for his emotions, teach him accountability now. Because if you don't, one day you might be visiting him in prison, wondering where you went wrong. And the answer will be, you saw it coming and did nothing. The workshop went viral on social media. Mothers across Kenya began having difficult conversations with their sons. Agnes became an unexpected voice in the prevention conversation. Meanwhile, Grace's work caught the attention of the Ministry of Gender. They invited her to help develop a national strategy for domestic violence response. "You've built something remarkable," the minister told her during their meeting. "We want to replicate your model nationwide." Grace was honored but cautious. Government programs often lack the personal touch that survivors need. "That's why we want you involved. You understand from the inside." Over the next months, Grace found herself in conference rooms with policymakers, training police officers on trauma-informed responses, speaking at universities about the economics of domestic violence. Her face became recognizable. Women would stop her on the street. "You're the Grace in Jerry. You saved my sister's life." She saw your story and finally left. Each encounter reminded Grace why she'd turned her pain into purpose. One evening, while reviewing applications for the center's job training program, Grace noticed a familiar name. Charity Mwangi, David's cousin. Grace remembered Charity, a quiet woman who'd attended their wedding but whom she'd barely known. She called Charity in for an interview personally. "I wasn't sure you'd see me," Charity admitted. "Given my connection to David." "Tell me why you're applying," Grace said neutrally. Charity took a deep breath. "Because my husband beats me. And seeing what you built from what David did to you, it gave me hope that I could escape and still have a life." Grace's professional mask slipped. "How long has he been hurting you?" 3 years. "I stayed because I was ashamed. Because in our family, we don't air our dirty laundry. But then I realized, David went to prison. His violence had consequences. Maybe mine should too." "Have you reported it?" "Not yet. I'm scared." Grace reached across the desk and took Charity's hand. "I understand that fear. But I'm going to help you. Not just with a job, but with everything. Safe housing, legal support, counseling. You don't have to do this alone." Charity's tears fell freely. "Thank you. Thank you so much." As Grace walked Charity through the intake process, she marveled at how life worked. David's violence had set off ripples. Terrible, destructive ripples. But Grace's survival had created counter-ripples of healing, reaching even David's own family. That weekend, Grace took her daughter to the park. As they played, she noticed a man watching them from a distance. Her heart raced. Old trauma never fully disappeared. But it wasn't David. It was a reporter who'd covered her trial. He approached respectfully. "Ms. Njeri, I'm sorry to interrupt your day off. I'm doing a follow-up story. Where are they now? Would you be willing to talk?" Grace hesitated, then agreed. They sat on a bench while her daughter played within sight. "How are you really?" the reporter asked. Not the public answer, but the truth. Grace considered the question. "I have nightmares still. Sometimes, loud noises make me jump. I'm hypervigilant about my daughter's safety. I'm in therapy, and I probably will be for years. The trauma doesn't just disappear." "But," Grace smiled slightly, "but I'm also happy. Genuinely happy. I love my work. I love being a mother. I love the life I've built. The trauma is part of my story, but it's not the whole story anymore. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." "And David? Have you had any contact?" "Only through letters, which I rarely read. He's in prison, attending rehabilitation programs according to his lawyer. Whether his change is real, I'll never know. And honestly, I don't need to know. His journey is his own now. Do you believe in redemption for people like him?" Grace thought carefully. "I believe people can change. I've seen it in some of the abusers whose partners come to our center. Some genuinely transform. But I also believe change requires consequences, accountability, and years of hard work. A few therapy sessions and some apologies aren't enough. So do I believe David can change? Maybe. Do I care if he does? Only in the sense that I hope he never hurts another woman. Beyond that, his redemption isn't my concern. My own healing is." The article, published the following week, was titled "Grace and Jerry, From Victim to Victor." It sparked a national conversation about domestic violence, with Grace at the center. But the attention also brought challenges. David's supporters emerged online, claiming Grace was exaggerating, that she was destroying a good man's life, that she should have forgiven and moved on. Grace learned to ignore the noise. She'd lived through the reality. She had nothing to prove to strangers on the internet. One supporter's comment, though, made her pause. If she was so abused, why did she marry him? She must have seen the signs. Grace decided to address this in her next public speaking engagement. People ask why women stay, why we don't see the signs earlier. Here's the truth. Abusers don't show up on the first date with a flashing warning sign. They're charming, attentive, loving. The violence escalates slowly, carefully. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're financially entangled, emotionally bonded, maybe with children. You think you can love them back to the person they pretended to be. You think you can fix them. You think it's your fault. These are all lies the abuse teaches you. So instead of asking why women stay, ask why men abuse. That's where the problem actually lies. The speech was met with standing ovation. As Grace drove home that night, she felt a profound sense of peace. She'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into something that helped thousands. David had tried to destroy her. Instead, he'd forged her into something unbreakable. And that, she realized, was the sweetest form of justice. David stood in line for breakfast, his metal tray clattering against others. 3 years into his sentence, prison had become routine. But unlike some inmates who were simply marking time, David had used every moment for transformation. Pastor Michael had become more than a chaplain. He'd become a mentor. Every week, they met for what the pastor called accountability conversations. "How are you really doing?" Pastor Michael asked during one session. "I'm angry," David admitted. "Not at Grace, not at the system. At myself. I keep thinking about the moment I could have stopped. The moment my hand was raised, and I could have chosen differently. That moment haunts me." "Good," the pastor said. "That means your conscience is alive. The day you stop feeling that pain is the day you've lost your humanity completely." David had also become a facilitator in the Violent Offenders Program. He shared his story with new inmates, many of whom arrived full of justifications and excuses. "I was drunk," one new inmate, Thomas, said during his first session. "I didn't know what I was doing." David shook his head. "That's a lie you're telling yourself. I was drunk too, but I knew exactly what I was doing. The alcohol didn't create the violence. It just removed my inhibitions to act on anger that was already there." "But she provoked me," Thomas protested. "And that's the second lie," David replied firmly. "Nothing she did or said justified your violence. Nothing. Until you accept that, you'll never change. You'll just become a better liar." The rawness of David's words often broke through defensive walls that counselors couldn't penetrate. Other inmates listened because he wasn't speaking theory. He was speaking from lived experience and genuine regret. Marcus, the program leader, pulled David aside after one particularly intense session. "You've come far," Marcus said. "When you first arrived, you were still making excuses. Now you're holding others accountable. That's real growth." "It doesn't change what I did," David replied quietly. "No, it doesn't. But it changes who you're becoming. And that matters, even if Grace never knows about it, even if you never get credit for it. You're breaking cycles that could have continued for generations." David had also started writing. Not letters to Grace. She'd made it clear she didn't want contact. But a journal, documenting his journey. Month 38. One entry read, "Today I helped a young inmate, barely 22, realize that hitting his girlfriend because she spoke to another man wasn't about protecting her. It was about control. He cried. Said his father did the same to his mother. Said he thought it was normal. Watching him have that realization reminded me of my own. How much violence we accept as normal until someone forces us to see it clearly. His mother visited monthly, though the visits were painful for both of them. Agnes had transformed too, becoming an advocate for mothers to hold their sons accountable. "I spoke at another workshop yesterday," she told him during one visit. 50 mothers came. Some were defensive at first, saying boys will be boys. But by the end, many were crying, realizing they'd enabled their sons' violence. "I'm sorry I put you through this, Mama," David said. "Don't apologize to me. I played a role in creating who you became. I should have disciplined you harder, gotten you help earlier. We both have to live with our failures." The conversation was typical of their visits now. Honest, painful, but ultimately healing. David had also started teaching literacy classes to fellow inmates. Many had dropped out of school early, contributing to their cycle of poverty and crime. Education, David had learned, was one pathway to real change. One student, an older man named Boniface, approached him after class. "Teacher David, why do you do this? You're an educated man. You could just keep to yourself, do your time, go home." David looked at him thoughtfully. "Because I destroyed an educated woman who was trying to build me up. The least I can do is build up others. It won't undo my crime, but maybe it balances the scales slightly." "You really regret it, don't you?" "Every single day." Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Grace's work continued to expand. She didn't know about David's transformation, and David didn't expect her to care. But one day, a journalist doing a feature on prison rehabilitation programs interviewed David. The article, "Can Violent Men Really Change?" featured his story prominently. Grace's assistant showed her the article. "You should see this," she said hesitantly. "It's about David." Grace took the tablet, her hands automatically steadying herself. She read carefully. The article detailed David's work in the prison, his facilitation of the Violent Offenders Program, his teaching. It included quotes from other inmates about how he'd helped them understand their own violence. One quote stood out: "David Kamau doesn't let us hide from what we've done. He forces us to see our victims as human beings, not as problems to be controlled. He saved my marriage by helping me see I was destroying it." Grace set down the tablet, emotions swirling. She felt. What? Not pride. Not forgiveness. But perhaps acknowledgement that change, however late, was still meaningful. "What do you think?" her assistant asked. "I think," Grace said slowly, "that I'm glad he's not the same man who hurt me. I hope it's real and lasting. But it doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't require any response from me." "Very healthy," her assistant agreed. That evening, Grace attended a support group for survivors. During sharing time, someone brought up the article. "Should we forgive men who change?" one woman asked. "If they genuinely transform, do we owe them forgiveness?" The room debated this. Some felt forgiveness was essential for their own healing. Others felt no obligation to forgive at all. Grace finally spoke. "I think forgiveness is personal and not owed to anyone. What matters more is justice and accountability. If an abuser truly changes, that's wonderful. For his next partner, for his children, for society. But the victim owes him nothing. Not forgiveness, not acknowledgement, not a second chance. Her healing is separate from his redemption." The group nodded in agreement. Another woman added, "And let's be real, some men perform change to manipulate their way back in. Real change happens without an audience, without expectation of reward." "Exactly," Grace agreed. "Which is why I don't need to know if David has changed. It's not my responsibility to verify or validate it. I've moved on. What he does with his life now is between him and God." Back in prison, David overheard 2 inmates discussing the article about him. "You think you're some kind of hero now," one sneered. "You still nearly killed your wife." "You're right," David replied calmly. "I'm not a hero. I'm a man trying to become better than the monster I was. That's all." The inmate walked away, but his question lingered. Was David trying to be a hero? To earn redemption? That night, David wrote in his journal, "I need to be careful. The work I'm doing can't be about redeeming myself in Grace's eyes or the public's eyes. It has to be about genuinely becoming a man who would never harm another woman. Period. No audience, no applause, no forgiveness necessary. Just change for the sake of being better." Pastor Michael reviewed the journal entry during their next session. "This is important," he said. "Many men do reform work to earn back credibility, to manipulate their way out of consequences. Your awareness of that temptation is crucial. Keep checking your motivations." "How do I know if my change is real?" David asked. "Time. Consistency. And most importantly, how you respond when no one's watching, when there's no reward for good behavior. That's when you discover who you really are." David nodded, committing to that test. 5 years into his sentence, David learned that Grace had been awarded the Presidential Order of Service for her work with domestic violence survivors. The ceremony was televised. He watched from the prison common room as Grace accepted the award, looking strong and radiant. She spoke about the importance of supporting survivors, of holding abusers accountable, of systemic change. She never mentioned him by name. He was part of her story, but not the center of it anymore. And David realized, that was exactly how it should be. "She looks well," Marcus commented, watching beside him. "She does," David agreed. "She's thriving. And she did it without me, despite me. That's how I know she's truly free." "Does it hurt, seeing her success?" David thought about it. "No. It makes me glad. If she'd stayed broken by what I did, that would have been another tragedy. Her healing, her success, those are victories over what I tried to destroy. I should feel glad, even if I played no part in it." Marcus patted his shoulder. "You're learning. Real love means wanting the best for someone, even when you're not part of their best." That night, David wrote a letter he never intended to send. "Dear Grace, I saw you receive your award today. You looked like a queen. I'm glad you didn't mention me. I don't deserve to be part of your story except as a cautionary tale. I hope you're happy. I hope you're loved by someone who cherishes you properly. I hope our daughter grows up strong like you. And I hope you never think of me again. You deserve a life where I'm completely erased. I'm working to become a man who would never hurt you. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to ensure no woman faces what you faced from me. I don't expect you to care. I don't expect you to even know. I just needed to say it, even if only to a piece of paper that will never reach you. May you continue to bloom in ways I tried to prevent. May you always be safe, loved, and free." He folded the letter and placed it in his journal, where it would remain forever unread by the woman it was meant for. And somehow that felt right. 7 years after the assault, Grace's life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Her daughter was now 10, excelling in school and blissfully unburdened by memories of that terrible night. New Dawn Women's Center had become a national network with 12 branches. Grace had even started dating, tentatively, carefully, but genuinely. His name was Dr. James Omondi, a pediatrician she'd met while treating a young abuse survivor's child. He was patient, gentle, and understood her triggers without her having to explain them repeatedly. "Take your time," he told her on their 3rd date when she'd flinched at his sudden movement. "I'm not going anywhere." That simple statement, "I'm not going anywhere," meant everything to someone who'd been conditioned to fear abandonment if she didn't comply. One Saturday morning, Grace took her daughter shopping at the Junction Mall. They were laughing, comparing shoes, when Grace heard a voice behind her. "Grace." She turned and froze. It was David's mother, Agnes. But Agnes wasn't alone. With her was a younger woman, maybe mid-20s, with kind eyes and nervous energy. "Grace, I'm so sorry to approach you like this," Agnes said quickly. "I know you've requested no contact, and I've respected that. But this is important. This is Sarah. She's my son David's girlfriend." Grace's world tilted. "Girlfriend?" David was still in prison. How did he have a girlfriend? Seeing Grace's confusion, Sarah spoke up. We met through the prison ministry. I volunteer there teaching computer skills. David and I became friends and then more. I know this is strange, but Mrs. Agnes thought I should meet you. Grace's daughter tugged at her hand, confused by the tension. Sweetheart, go look at the books over there, Grace said gently. I'll be right there. Once her daughter was out of earshot, Grace turned to the two women. Why are you telling me this? Agnes's eyes filled with tears. Because Sarah deserves to know the truth from the person who lived it, not just from David's reformed version. I told her she needed to meet you before she makes any decisions about her future with him. Grace looked at Sarah, this young woman who was holding hands with the ghost of Grace's trauma. Can we talk? Sarah asked quietly. Please. I'll understand if you say no, but I need to know what I'm getting into. Against every instinct for self-preservation, Grace agreed. They found a quiet cafe in the mall and sat down. Grace addressed Sarah directly. Why do you want to hear my story? David was convicted. The truth is public record. I've read the court documents, Sarah said. But documents don't tell me if he's genuinely changed or if he's just performing change. You know him in a way no one else does. I need your honest assessment. Grace stirred her coffee slowly. I don't know if he's changed. I haven't seen him in 7 years. But if you had to guess, Sarah pressed. Based on what you knew of him? Grace took a deep breath. This was surreal, counseling her abuser's potential future victim. David was complicated, Grace began. When I met him, he was charming, ambitious, kind. The violence emerged gradually after we married, especially after he lost his job. He felt emasculated, and instead of dealing with those feelings healthily, he took them out on me. Sarah listened intently. By the end, he'd become someone I didn't recognize. Alcohol made it worse, but the violence was always a choice. He chose to hit me, to choke me, to nearly kill me. Do you think he could do it again? Sarah asked directly. Grace met her eyes. Honestly, I don't know. People can change. I've seen abusers genuinely transform. But I've also seen men who fake transformation to access new victims. Without observing David personally, I can't tell you which he is. What should I look for? Sarah asked. Red flags. Grace was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her phone. She opened her notes app, where she kept resources for the women at her center. These are warning signs, Grace said, showing Sarah the list. Does he take responsibility without making excuses? Does he respect boundaries without guilt-tripping? How does he handle anger and stress? Does he try to isolate you from friends and family? Is he jealous or controlling? These patterns usually emerge gradually. Sarah photographed the list with her phone. Agnes spoke up. I've told Sarah everything I know about what David did to you. I've been honest about my own failures as his mother. But I also see how he is in prison. Teaching, counseling others, staying sober. I don't know if it's real either. Grace turned to Agnes. You've done good work with the Mothers Program. I respect that. But you need to tell Sarah something I suspect you haven't. Agnes paled. What? That even if David has changed, Sarah doesn't owe him a chance. Even if he's genuinely transformed, she has every right to walk away. Supporting his rehabilitation doesn't mean sacrificing herself as a test case. Sarah's eyes widened at this blunt honesty. Grace continued, addressing Sarah. You seem like a kind person. The fact that you volunteer at a prison tells me you believe in redemption. But believing in redemption doesn't mean you have to be the one to test if it's real. That's an enormous burden. But I love him, Sarah said quietly. I loved him too, Grace replied. And that love nearly killed me. Love isn't enough when you're dealing with someone who has a history of violence. Safety comes first. Always. They sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Sarah asked the question Grace had been dreading. If he's released, he's eligible for parole in 6 months. Would you be afraid? Grace considered this honestly. For myself. Not really. I have restraining orders, security systems, and I've built a completely separate life. He has no access to me. But am I afraid for whoever he ends up with? Yes. Because I'll never know for certain if his change is real until he's tested by real-world stresses. And by then, it might be too late for his partner. Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing this. Can I ask you something? Grace said. Why are you willing to take this risk? Because everyone deserves a second chance, Sarah answered immediately. That's what I used to think, Grace said gently. But I've learned that second chances aren't obligations. They're gifts. And you don't have to give that gift at the expense of your own safety and peace. Agnes wiped her eyes. Grace, I brought Sarah to you because I didn't want another woman hurt by my son. If you tell her to run, she should listen. Grace shook her head. I can't make that decision for her. But I can tell her this. If you proceed with this relationship, Sarah, be vigilant. Trust your instincts. The moment something feels wrong, leave immediately. Don't wait for it to escalate like I did. Don't make excuses. And most importantly, tell people. Tell friends, family, everyone about the relationship so you're not isolated if things go wrong. Sarah nodded, taking notes on her phone. And one more thing, Grace added. If you do this, you're not just dating a man. You're dating his history. That trauma will live in your relationship. Are you prepared for that? I don't know, Sarah admitted. But I want to try. Grace saw herself in Sarah. The hope, the belief in redemption, the desire to see the best in people. It was beautiful and terrifying at once. They exchanged contact information, and Grace made Sarah promise to reach out if she ever felt unsafe. As they prepared to leave, Agnes grabbed Grace's hand. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for being honest with her, even though you owed us nothing. I didn't do it for you or for David, Grace replied. I did it for her. Because no woman should enter a relationship without knowing the full truth. That evening, Grace told James about the encounter. How do you feel? He asked, holding her hand. Strange, Grace admitted. Part of me wants to tell her to run. Another part respects her autonomy to make her own choices. And a tiny part of me wonders if David really has changed. Does it matter to you if he has? Grace thought about it. Only in the sense that I don't want another woman to go through what I did. Beyond that, his life is separate from mine now. I don't think about him most days. I've built something beautiful from the ashes of what he destroyed. You have, James agreed, kissing her forehead. You really have. Later that night, Grace checked her phone and saw a text from Sarah. Thank you for today. I've decided to slow things down with David. I'm going to spend the next 6 months really evaluating this relationship before he's released. Your honesty gave me permission to be cautious instead of naive. I won't forget this. Grace smiled. Maybe the conversation had helped after all. She typed back, trust yourself. Your safety matters more than anyone's second chance. And remember, loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. As she hit send, Grace felt a weight lift. She'd done what she could. The rest was up to Sarah. And Grace. She had her own life to live, a life full of purpose, love, and the kind of peace she once thought impossible. 8 years after the night that changed everything, David walked out of prison. The morning sun felt harsh after years of dim cells and fluorescent lighting. His mother waited at the gate, older now, her hair more gray than black. They hugged silently. No words could capture the complexity of this moment. Sarah, David asked. She's waiting at home. She wants to talk. The 6-month separation before his release had been hard but necessary. Sarah had been true to her word. She'd evaluated their relationship carefully, with the help of a counselor and with continued contact with Grace's center. When David arrived at his mother's small apartment in Buruburu, Sarah was there, sitting on the couch with her hands folded. "Hi," David said nervously. "Hi." They sat across from each other, the weight of his history between them. "I met with Grace again last month," Sarah said. "One more time before you were released. I needed to be sure." David nodded. "What did she say?" "She said I should trust my instincts above everything else. She said real change shows in small moments, how you handle frustration, disappointment, stress. She said if you truly respect women now, it will show in every interaction, not just with me but with every woman you encounter." "She's right," David said quietly. "So here's what I need from you," Sarah continued, her voice steady. "Complete transparency. If you drink even once, I'm gone. If you raise your voice in anger, I'm gone. If you show any sign of the man you were, I'm gone. No second chances beyond this one. Do you understand?" "I understand." "And therapy. Together and separately. Forever. This isn't negotiable." "I agree." Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm willing to try, David. But I'm walking into this with my eyes wide open. I know what you're capable of. And I won't be forgiving or patient if you slip." "I don't want forgiveness or patience," David said. "I want to be the man I should have been all along." Their relationship proceeded cautiously. David got a job as an accountant at a small firm willing to hire ex-convicts. He continued therapy, attended AA meetings religiously, and volunteered at a men's accountability program on weekends. Months passed. Sarah watched him carefully, noting how he handled stress when a project went wrong at work, how he responded when she said no to his requests, how he treated waitresses and shop attendants. He passed every test. But Sarah also noticed something else: the weight he carried. David was a man living under the shadow of his own history, and while he'd changed, the guilt never left him. "Do you ever think about her?" Sarah asked one evening as they cooked dinner together. "Grace. Every day," David admitted. "I think about what I took from her, her peace, her trust, years of her life spent recovering from what I did." "Do you want to reach out?" "No. She doesn't need my apology or my update. The best thing I can do for her is stay completely out of her life." Sarah respected that. It showed understanding of boundaries, of consequences that lasted beyond prison time. Meanwhile, Grace's life had blossomed in ways she never imagined. New Dawn Women's Center was now in 15 cities. She'd published a book, Breaking Free, A Survivor's Guide to Reclaiming Your Life. It became a bestseller, helping thousands of women find the courage to leave abusive situations. Her daughter was thriving, a bright, confident 11-year-old who wanted to be a lawyer, to help people like Mama helps people. And James had proposed. Grace had said yes, but only after 2 years of therapy to work through her fear of marriage, of trusting a man with that level of commitment again. The wedding was simple, held in a small garden with close friends and family. As Grace walked down the aisle, her daughter proudly serving as flower girl, she thought about how far she'd come. From the woman who'd nearly died on a concrete floor to this woman, radiant in white, choosing love again on her own terms. During her vows, Grace spoke words she'd written herself. "James, you taught me that love doesn't have to hurt. That gentleness is not weakness. That a real man protects, never destroys. Today I marry you not because I need you, but because I choose you. And that choice is the freest thing I've ever done." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. The reception was joyful. Helen from the shelter gave a toast. "Grace came to us broken and turned her pain into purpose. She's helped over 1,000 women escape violence. Today, we celebrate her getting her own happy ending." Later, during a quiet moment, Grace's sister Faith pulled her aside. "Did you hear? David was released from prison." Grace had known this was coming. "Yes, I heard. Are you worried?" "No," Grace said honestly. "My life is separate from his now. He can't touch what I've built, what I've become. And if he's changed, good. If he hasn't, that's not my burden to carry. You're remarkable, you know that? Grace smiled. I'm a survivor who refused to stay broken. That's all. Across the city, David sat in his small apartment watching the sunset. He'd seen Grace's wedding announcement on social media. Her privacy settings allowed public viewing of the announcement but nothing else. He studied the photo, Grace glowing, happy, standing beside a man who looked at her with reverence. Their daughter between them, laughing. She got her happy ending, he whispered. Sarah, who'd moved in with him 6 months prior after intensive counseling approved the step, came up behind him. You okay? Yeah. I'm genuinely happy for her. She deserves every bit of joy she's found. Do you wish you could tell her you're sorry? One last time. David shook his head. My apology would just be for my own peace of mind. She doesn't need it. The best apology I can give her is living differently, making sure no woman ever suffers from me again. Sarah kissed his forehead. That's growth. 3 years later, Grace was invited to speak at a national conference on domestic violence prevention. The event was massive. Politicians, activists, survivors, and advocates from across East Africa. During the Q&A session, a woman in the back raised her hand. My name is Sarah. I'm in a relationship with a man who previously served time for domestic violence. He's been in rehabilitation and seems genuinely changed. But I'm terrified. How do I know if it's real? Grace's heart stopped. She knew immediately who this was. The room went silent, waiting for her response. Grace took a breath and spoke carefully. That's a question only you can answer through careful observation over time. Look at patterns, not promises. How does he handle conflict? How does he treat people with less power than him? Does he respect your boundaries? Does he take responsibility without making excuses? Sarah nodded, writing notes. Grace continued, but I'll say this, you don't owe anyone a test run of their redemption. Even if he's genuinely changed, that doesn't obligate you to stay. Your safety and peace matter more than his second chance. And if you choose to stay, do it with support systems in place, with people who know your situation, with an exit plan if needed. What if I love him? Sarah asked, her voice breaking slightly. Grace's voice was gentle but firm. Love is not enough when violence is in the history. Safety, respect, and genuine change. Those are the foundations. Love can exist alongside wisdom and caution. After the session, Sarah approached Grace privately. Thank you for not exposing who I am to the crowd, she said quietly. That wasn't my story to tell, Grace replied. How are you, Sarah? Really? I'm okay. He's been good. Really good. Therapy is helping both of us. He works hard, treats me well, and he's genuinely remorseful. I'm glad, Grace said sincerely. But promise me you'll stay vigilant. Not paranoid, but aware. I promise. And Grace, thank you for what you did for me 3 years ago. Meeting you probably saved my life. Maybe. Or maybe you saved your own life by being willing to ask hard questions. Grace paused. Tell him. Actually, don't tell him anything. He doesn't need updates about me. Just live your life safely. Sarah understood. I will. As Sarah walked away, Grace felt a strange sense of closure. She'd done what she could, protected another woman, shared her wisdom, set boundaries. The rest was not her responsibility. That evening, Grace returned home to find James cooking dinner and her daughter doing homework at the kitchen table. This was her life now. Peaceful, loving, safe. How was the conference? James asked, kissing her cheek. Intense but good. I think we're making a difference. Her daughter looked up. Mama, my teacher wants you to come speak to our class about courage. Grace smiled. I'd be honored. Later, after tucking her daughter into bed, Grace stood on her balcony looking at the Nairobi skyline. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who believed love conquered all, who made excuses for violence, who almost died rather than leave. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong, purposeful, free. And she thought about the 1,000 women who'd come through her center, each with their own story of survival. "This is why I lived," she whispered to the night sky. "Not just to survive, but to help others survive too." Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a woman she'd counseled 2 years ago. "Grace, I just want you to know, I got my degree today. After leaving my abusive husband, I went back to school. I'm now a social worker. I'm helping women just like you helped me. Thank you for showing me that life after abuse can be beautiful." Grace's eyes filled with happy tears. This was the real victory, not just her own healing, but the ripple effect of healing she'd created. In his apartment across town, David sat at his small desk, writing in his journal, a practice he'd maintained since prison. Year 10 since that night. "I'm sober, employed, in therapy, and in a healthy relationship. But I will never forget what I did. Grace is thriving. I see her impact in the news, in the women she helps. She turned horror into hope. I can only hope that my own change, however invisible to her, means no other woman suffers what she suffered. That's the only redemption I can earn, becoming someone who would never harm again. I'll carry this guilt until I die. That's my consequence. But I'll also carry the responsibility to be better. Every single day." He closed the journal and looked at a small card Sarah had given him. It read, "Being sorry means changing." "I'm trying," he whispered. "Every day I'm trying." Meanwhile, Grace climbed into bed beside James, who was already half asleep. "I love you," she whispered. "Love you too," he murmured, pulling her close. As Grace drifted off to sleep, she had no nightmares, no fear, just peace. She had taken the worst chapter of her life and rewritten the ending. And in doing so, she'd shown countless others that they could rewrite their endings too. The story that began with violence ended with victory. Not because her abuser changed, that was his journey, but because she refused to let what he did define what she became. And that, perhaps, was the greatest triumph of all. The end. Thank you for journeying through this powerful story with Stories by Tino. If this touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our emotional stories.